Folks, what I'm about to tell you will shake the very foundations of everything you believed about Washington corruption. At precisely 10:15 a.m. this Wednesday morning, Senator Adam Schiff walked into what he assumed was a routine Senate Intelligence Committee oversight hearing. He strutted through those marble halls with the arrogance of a man who had spent 8 years manipulating the American people, lying on national television, and weaponizing the intelligence apparatus against his political enemies. He had his Harvard-trained legal mind ready, his rehearsed talking points polished, his media allies positioned to spin whatever narrative he needed. What Adam Schiff didn't know, what his expensive lawyers hadn't warned him about, what absolutely nobody in his inner circle had prepared him for, was that Deputy Director Dan Bongino had spent the last 9 months building the most comprehensive criminal case in American political history. By the time this hearing concluded, the man who had terrorized a presidency, fabricated evidence, and sold out his country would be broken, exposed, and facing charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. But let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand exactly how deep this corruption runs, and how justice finally caught up with the most dangerous politician in modern American history. The morning started like any other for Adam Schiff. He woke up in his $1 million Georgetown townhouse, the one he somehow afforded on a congressional salary, and reviewed his strategy with his chief of staff over organic fair trade coffee that cost more per pound than most Americans make in a day. The hearing was supposed to be simple, routine FBI oversight, nothing more than political theater where he could grandstand about imaginary threats to democracy, while the complicit media captured soundbites for the evening news. Schiff's Italian leather shoes, custom-made in Milan at $3,000 a pair, clicked confidently against the Senate building's polished floors as he made his way to hearing room 214. His red tie, the one he always wore to important proceedings, was knotted perfectly. His gray suit, tailored on Savile Row, fit like it had been painted on. Everything about Adam Schiff's appearance screamed power, authority, and untouchability. He was a man who had brought down a president's advisors, who had run impeachment proceedings, who had the mainstream media eating out of his hand. Today was supposed to be another victory lap, another opportunity to position himself as democracy's great defender while simultaneously destroying anyone who dared question his authority. But the moment Schiff pushed open those heavy oak doors, something felt wrong. The room was too crowded, too tense. Instead of the usual handful of board staffers and C-SPAN cameras, the gallery was packed wall to wall with federal agents, military personnel in dress uniforms, and faces Schiff recognized from the intelligence community, people who should have been his allies but whose expressions carried nothing but cold contempt. At every exit stood federal marshals, their presence far exceeding what routine oversight would require. The air itself felt charged with electricity, like the moment before a lightning strike when every hair on your body stands on end. And there, sitting at the witness table with the calm confidence of an apex predator who had finally cornered its prey, was Dan Bongino, the former NYPD officer, former Secret Service agent, and newly appointed FBI deputy director, sat with his hands folded on top of a stack of folders so thick they looked like they could contain the secrets of the entire federal government. His eyes never left Schiff's face as the senator made his way to his seat, and the smile playing at the corners of Bongino's mouth was the smile of a man who knew something devastating that nobody else in the room had figured out yet. "Senator Schiff," Bongino began, his voice carrying that unmistakable New York street cop edge that had made him famous, "thank you for joining us this morning. I know your schedule is very busy, what with all the television appearances, book deals, and fundraisers you've been doing instead of actual congressional work." The insult was delivered so smoothly, so casually, that it took a moment for its impact to register. Several people in the gallery suppressed smirks. Schiff's media-trained smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Deputy Director Bongino," he replied, his voice dripping with the condescension of a Harvard lawyer addressing someone he considered intellectually inferior, "I'm always happy to provide oversight of the FBI, especially given the Bureau's recent troubles with credibility and leadership." The implication was clear. Schiff was suggesting that Bongino himself was one of those credibility problems. It was a calculated move, an attempt to put the witness on the defensive before the questioning even began. But Bongino didn't take the bait. Instead, his smile grew wider, more predatory. "Oh, we're definitely going to be discussing credibility today, Senator. In fact, credibility is going to be the central theme of everything we talk about. Your credibility, your lies, your crimes, and by the end of this hearing, your complete and total destruction." The room went silent. This wasn't normal oversight hearing language. This was a declaration of war. Schiff tried to recover, falling back on his prosecutor training. "Mr. Bongino, those are serious allegations. I hope you have evidence to back up such inflammatory rhetoric. Otherwise, you might find yourself facing consequences for defaming a sitting United States senator." Bongino's laugh was cold and humorless. "Evidence? Oh, Adam, I've got evidence you can't even imagine." He patted the stack of folders in front of him. "I've got recordings, documents, witness testimony, financial records, and about 18 different felonies I'm about to prove you committed. But more than that, I've got something you never thought anybody would have. The truth." He leaned forward slightly, his street cop intensity filling the room. "See, while you were busy playing games with classified information, leaking to your media friends, and positioning yourself as America's moral guardian, I was doing what I've always done, following the evidence, building cases, and waiting for the perfect moment to bring down corrupt politicians who think they're above the law. And Adam, that moment is right now." Skiff's confident facade wavered for just a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes, but Bongino caught it. He had spent 12 years as an NYPD detective reading suspects' tells, and another 12 years in the Secret Service reading threats. He knew fear when he saw it, and he had just seen the first flicker of genuine fear cross Adam Skiff's face. "Let's start simple," Bongino continued, opening the first folder with deliberate slowness. "January 17, 2018. You appeared on CNN with Jake Tapper. Do you remember what you told him about Russian collusion evidence?" Skiff's legal training kicked in immediately. "I gave many interviews about the ongoing investigation into Russian interference in our democratic process." Bongino pulled out a printed transcript. "Let me refresh your memory. You said, and I quote, 'We have seen evidence of collusion. We have seen evidence that is more than circumstantial. The American people have a right to know what that evidence is.' Do you stand by that statement?" "Of course," Schiff replied, his prosecutor's confidence returning. "The evidence supported my assessment at the time." Bongino's smile was the last thing Schiff would see before his world started crumbling. "Perfect answer, Senator. Absolutely perfect. Because what I'm about to show the American people is going to prove, beyond any reasonable doubt, that you were lying through your teeth." The deputy director reached into his briefcase and pulled out what looked like an old-fashioned digital voice recorder, the kind you could buy at any electronics store for $20. "Before I play this," Bongino said, holding up the device like a prosecutor displaying murder weapon evidence, "I want everyone to understand something very important. This recording was made on an unsecured phone line. No classified methods, no sophisticated FBI surveillance, just you being stupid enough to coordinate your lies where anyone with the right equipment could listen in. And guess what? Someone was listening." Skiff's face went pale. Any recordings of congressional communications would be illegal wiretapping. "Wrong," Bongino shot back immediately. "When you're conspiring to defraud the United States government on an open phone line, you've got no expectation of privacy. That's not surveillance, Senator. That's you being an idiot. And before you try to claim this is inadmissible, let me remind you that we're not in a court of law right now. We're in the court of public opinion, and these millions of Americans watching on television have a right to know that their senator is a fraud." He pressed play, and Adam Schiff's own voice filled the committee room, crystal clear and unmistakably authentic. "Jake, it's Adam. Listen, I need you to run with the Russia story tomorrow morning. I know we don't have solid evidence yet, but we need to keep the pressure on Trump until we can manufacture something that sticks." The response came in Jake Tapper's recognizable voice, though slightly distorted by the phone connection. "Adam, are you absolutely sure about this? If it comes out that we're coordinating narratives without actual evidence, both of us are finished." Skiff's recorded voice was dismissive and arrogant. "It won't come out. Trust me. Nobody's watching phone calls between a congressman and a journalist. Just run the story about secret communications between Trump Tower and Kremlin-linked banks. Use the words bombshell and smoking gun as many times as possible. The American people are sheep, Jake. They'll believe whatever we tell them to believe. Make it sound ominous. Make it sound like impeachment is inevitable. And by the time anyone figures out there's no actual there, we'll already be in control of the House and none of it will matter. The committee room erupted in chaos. Republican senators were on their feet demanding order. Democratic staffers were frantically typing on their phones, probably warning their bosses that the situation was spiraling out of control. The media section, packed with reporters who had spent years carrying water for Adam Schiff, sat in stunned silence as they realized they had been played. "Stop that recording immediately," Schiff shouted, his prosecutor's composure completely shattered. "This is illegal surveillance and inadmissible as evidence in any legal proceeding." Bongino calmly stopped the playback. "You're right about one thing, Senator. This wouldn't be admissible in a criminal trial because of how it was obtained. But we're not in a criminal trial. Not yet, anyway. This is a congressional hearing, which means I can present whatever evidence I want to show the American people what kind of man represents them in the United States Senate." He pulled out another recording device. "But don't worry, I've got plenty more where that came from, and some of it is perfectly admissible in the criminal proceedings that are definitely coming your way. This next recording is particularly interesting. It's a conversation between you and former special counsel Robert Mueller, dated March 23, 2017. Before Schiff could object, Bongino pressed play on the second device. Mueller's tired, conflicted voice came through the speakers. "Adam, I'm not comfortable with the direction you want this investigation to take. The evidence simply doesn't support the conclusions you're asking me to reach. Every lead we follow turns into a dead end." Schiff's voice on the recording was cold and demanding, completely different from his public persona of thoughtful concern. "Robert, let me be very clear about something. You don't work for the evidence. You work for the American people, and what the American people need right now is accountability for Donald Trump. I don't care if you have to stretch the evidence, reinterpret the data, or follow leads you know won't pan out. Your job is to find anything, that we can use to remove this president from office." Mueller's response carried an edge of desperation. "That's not how special counsel investigations work, Adam. I can't manufacture evidence that doesn't exist. I won't compromise my integrity or the integrity of this investigation just because you don't like the results we're finding." Schiff's recorded voice turned threatening. "Robert, I'm going to say this once, and I suggest you listen very carefully. You will find evidence of collusion, or you will find yourself unemployed and unemployable. I have enough senators and congressmen in my pocket to destroy your reputation and your career. Every case you ever prosecuted will be reviewed. Every decision you ever made will be questioned. And by the time I'm done with you, you won't be able to get a job teaching paralegal studies at a community college. So I strongly suggest you reconsider your commitment to evidence and start thinking about your commitment to democracy." The recording ended and the silence in the committee room was absolute. Even the most partisan Democrats looked shaken by what they had just heard. Here was undeniable proof that Adam Schiff had attempted to coerce a special counsel into fabricating evidence against a sitting president. This wasn't political hardball. This wasn't aggressive oversight. This was conspiracy to obstruct justice, abuse of power, and potentially treason. Schiff's face had gone from pale to gray. His hands, visible on the table in front of him, were trembling. His Harvard training, his prosecutor's instincts, everything that had made him dangerous for 8 years had suddenly abandoned him. "This is taken completely out of context," he stammered, his voice cracking. "These conversations were about ensuring a thorough investigation into legitimate concerns about foreign interference in our elections." Context. Bongino's eyebrows shot up. "You threatened to destroy a special counsel's career if he didn't fabricate evidence against a president you disagreed with, and you think context makes that better." He shook his head in mock disbelief. "Adam, you're even dumber than I thought. And trust me, I already thought you were pretty damn stupid." The deputy director pulled out a thick manila folder marked with evidence tags. "But here's the thing about recordings, Senator. They're great for proving what you said, but they don't always capture why you said it. So let me help fill in that context you're so concerned about. He opened the folder to reveal what appeared to be financial records. These are your bank statements from March 2017 through December 2019. Very interesting reading. Lots of deposits from sources that a sitting congressman probably shouldn't be taking money from. Schiff tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. His attorney, who had been sitting silently behind him, finally leaned forward to whisper urgently in his ear. Schiff shook his head violently, apparently rejecting whatever advice he was receiving. Bongino continued, his voice taking on the methodical tone of a detective walking a jury through evidence. March 15, 2017, 1 week before your threatening phone call to Robert Mueller, your wife's consulting business received a wire transfer of $250,000 from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. March 29, 2 weeks after that phone call, another transfer, this time for $375,000. April 12, $500,000. He looked up at Schiff with contempt. Someone was paying you a lot of money to make sure that Mueller investigation went a certain direction. My wife runs a legitimate consulting business, Schiff managed to say, though his voice lacked any conviction. Oh, I'm sure she does, Bongino replied. Let's talk about that business. He pulled out incorporation documents. Strategic Insights LLC, registered in Delaware, filed by your wife Eve Schiff as the managing member. According to the business license, they provide strategic communications consulting to Fortune 500 companies. Sounds very impressive. He pulled out another document. Here's the problem, Senator. Strategic Insights LLC has no employees besides your wife, no office space, no website, no client list, no work product, no deliverables, no contracts, nothing except a bank account that receives millions of dollars in wire transfers from offshore shell companies. You know what we call that in law enforcement? Money laundering. And you know what we call it when a congressman's family member receives millions in unexplained payments while that congressman is running politically motivated investigations. Bribery, corruption. And if those payments are coming from foreign sources, which I believe we're going to prove they are, then we call it treason. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Treason, not a political disagreement, not an ethics violation. Treason, the most serious crime a public official can commit, punishable by life in prison or death. Schiff's attorney stood up abruptly. Deputy Director, my client invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and will not be answering any further questions without proper legal counsel and procedures. Bongino's laugh was harsh. Your client can invoke whatever constitutional rights he wants, counsel. But this isn't a criminal interrogation, and I'm not asking him questions. I'm presenting evidence to the American people. He can sit there silently and let his guilt speak for itself, or he can try to explain away the mountain of proof I'm about to bury him under. Either way, we're going to get through all 6 of these folders before this hearing is over. 6 folders. Schiff's eyes went to the stack on the table, and for the first time, he seemed to understand the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't a single allegation or a narrow investigation. This was comprehensive, devastating, and had clearly been building for months or maybe years. Everything he had done, every corner he had cut, every law he had broken, it had all been documented, and now it was all going to come out. Bongino opened the second folder. Let's talk about the FISA warrants, Senator. You know, those warrants you used to spy on American citizens who had the audacity to support Donald Trump. Schiff tried to object, but no words came out. He just sat there, mouth opening and closing soundlessly, looking like a fish drowning in air. The deputy director pulled out official court documents bearing the seal of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. These are warrant applications submitted to the FISA court between January 2017 and October 2018. Signed by FBI officials, approved by federal judges, all perfectly legal on their face. Except for one tiny problem. He held up a highlighted section. The evidence supporting these applications was fabricated, and you knew it was fabricated, and you pushed for these warrants anyway because you wanted to spy on Americans for political purposes. Bongino pulled out the now infamous Steele dossier, its pages marked with dozens of sticky notes. The Steele dossier, 35 pages of unverified allegations, Russian disinformation, and outright lies. Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer, paid by the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's campaign to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. You knew it was opposition research. You knew it was unverified. You knew it was unreliable. And you presented it to the FISA court as legitimate intelligence anyway. Let me read from your own testimony to the FISA court during a closed session in March 2017. Bongino adjusted his glasses and began reading. The evidence contained in this dossier has been corroborated by multiple independent intelligence sources. The FBI has verified the core allegations and finds the source to be credible and reliable. Based on this intelligence, there is probable cause to believe that American citizens are acting as agents of a foreign power. Every word of that testimony was a lie, Bongino said flatly. Every single word. The FBI hadn't verified the core allegations because they couldn't be verified because they were made up. Christopher Steele wasn't credible or reliable. He was a paid operative working for your political party. And the only foreign power Americans were acting as agents for was the Democratic Party's Oppo research operation. He pulled out a series of FBI internal memos. These are communications between FBI officials expressing serious doubts about the Steele dossier. January 4, 2017, one agent writes, "We cannot corroborate any of the specific allegations in the Steele document." February 11th, another memo. Christopher Steele appears to have biases that call into question his reliability as a source. March 2nd, recommendation is to not use Steele material for any official proceedings. Yet despite all these warnings, you pushed forward with FISA applications based entirely on that discredited dossier. Bongino looked directly at Schiff. You didn't just lie to a federal court, Senator. You weaponized the intelligence apparatus of the United States government against American citizens for political purposes. That's not oversight. That's tyranny. And if you think I'm exaggerating, let me show you the list of Americans you illegally spied on. The deputy director projected a list onto the large screens around the committee room. The names read like a who's who of conservative media and politics. Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Congressman Devin Nunes, Congressman Jim Jordan, Senator Rand Paul, journalist Sarah Carter, journalist John Solomon. The list went on. Dozens of American citizens whose only crime was opposing Adam Schiff's political agenda. You obtained FISA warrants to monitor their communications, Bongino explained. Their phone calls, their emails, their text messages, everything. And then you leaked selected excerpts to your friends in the media to damage their reputations and silence their criticism. He pulled out printed news articles. Here's a story from March 2017 in the Washington Post about Congressman Nunes supposedly having inappropriate contacts with foreign nationals. The story cites anonymous intelligence sources. He pulled out phone records. These records show you called Washington Post reporter Ellen Nakashima 17 minutes before this story was published. Another article, this one from April 2017 in the New York Times, suggesting Sean Hannity was coordinating with Russian intelligence. Again, anonymous sources. He pulled out more phone records. You called New York Times reporter Adam Goldman 32 minutes before publication. Pattern after pattern after pattern of you illegally accessing classified surveillance data and leaking it to journalists to destroy your political enemies. Schiff found his voice, though it was weak and thready. Those leaks could have come from anyone with access to that information. Could have, Bongino agreed. Except we have your phone records showing you contacted these reporters immediately before every single story. We have testimony from intelligence analysts who reported your unusual requests for information about specific individuals. And best of all, he pulled out another recording device. We have you bragging about it to your chief of staff. Before Schiff could react, Bongino played the recording. Schiff's voice was unmistakable. The FISA court is our weapon, Dan. As long as we control the intelligence committees, we can surveil anyone we want. Trump supporters, conservative journalists, Republican congressmen, it doesn't matter. We get the warrant, we monitor their communications, and then we leak whatever makes them look bad to our media friends. It's beautiful, really. Completely legal on paper, devastating in practice. The voice of Schiff's chief of staff responded, Sir, isn't that an abuse of the surveillance system? It's only abuse if we get caught, Skiff's recorded voice replied. And who's going to catch us? We're the oversight. We're the ones who are supposed to be preventing abuse. It's the perfect crime. The recording ended and the committee room sat in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. A sitting chairman of the House Intelligence Committee had weaponized the nation's most powerful surveillance tools against American citizens for purely political purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, Bongino addressed the room and the cameras broadcasting to millions of Americans. What you just heard is a sitting member of Congress admitting to systematic abuse of the FISA system. This isn't a scandal. This is a constitutional crisis. He stood up, his voice rising with barely contained anger. Adam Schiff swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. Instead, he used his position to spy on Americans, leak classified information, and destroy the lives of anyone who disagreed with him politically. This is exactly what the Founding Fathers feared when they wrote the Fourth Amendment. This is why we have protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. And this man, he pointed directly at Schiff, turned those protections into weapons against the American people. Bongino sat back down and reached for the third folder. But as bad as all of that is, Senator, it's not even close to your worst crime. Because everything we've talked about so far, the lying, the fabricated evidence, the illegal surveillance, all of that was in service of something much darker. He opened the folder to reveal photographs and documents marked with Chinese government seals. Let's talk about your relationship with the Ministry of State Security of the People's Republic of China. The color drained from Skiff's face so quickly that he looked like he might pass out. His attorney grabbed his arm, probably to steady him, but Schiff shook him off. This is a grotesque fabrication, Schiff managed to say, but his voice carried no conviction whatsoever. Is it? Bongino pulled out surveillance photographs showing Schiff meeting with Chinese nationals in various locations. Beverly Hills Restaurant, March 2016. San Francisco Hotel, August 2016. Washington, D.C. Cafe, November 2016. All before you became chairman of the Intelligence Committee, but clearly during the early planning stages of your operation. He spread out more photographs like a poker player showing a winning hand. These men you're meeting with have all been identified as officers of China's Ministry of State Security. This gentleman, he pointed to one photo, is Chen Wei, Deputy Director of MSS American Operations. This one is Li Zhao, Senior Intelligence Officer specializing in political recruitment. And this one is Wang Ming, who handles financial arrangements for MSS assets in the United States. Bongino pulled out what appeared to be Chinese intelligence documents, translated into English. We obtained these from a source inside Chinese intelligence who was horrified by what you were helping them do. These are your operational files, Senator. Your code name, your handler assignments, your payment schedules, and your mission objectives. Everything documented in meticulous detail because the Chinese keep very good records of their assets. Your code name was Cardinal, Bongino said, reading from the document, chosen because you always wore red ties to your meeting with handlers, which they found amusing and very American. You were recruited in early 2016 when Chinese intelligence identified you as vulnerable to financial pressure due to your wife's failed business ventures and your own expensive lifestyle. They started with small payments disguised as consulting fees to your wife's company. $50,000 here, $75,000 there, just enough to help with cash flow problems but not enough to raise red flags. He pulled out bank records showing the progression of payments. But after you became Intelligence Committee Chairman in January 2017, the payments increased dramatically. 200,000, 500,000, eventually reaching over $1 million per quarter. The Chinese were investing heavily in their cardinal asset, and you were delivering. Bongino displayed a translated Chinese intelligence assessment. This is an internal MSS evaluation of your performance dated June 2018. Let me read the highlights. Asset Cardinal has exceeded all operational expectations. His position as chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence provides unparalleled access to American classified information and intelligence operations. He has provided detailed information on CIA operations in China, NSA surveillance capabilities, FBI counterintelligence methods, and Defense Department strategic planning. Asset Cardinal's public position as a Trump critic provides perfect cover for his intelligence activities. Americans believe he is motivated by patriotism and concern for democracy, when in fact he is one of our most productive intelligence sources in decades. The words hung in the air like an indictment handed down from history itself. Adam Schiff, the man who had spent 4 years accusing Donald Trump of being compromised by foreign powers, was himself a paid agent of Chinese intelligence. The hypocrisy was so massive, so comprehensive, that it almost defied belief, except the evidence was right there, documented by China's own intelligence service. Bongino continued reading. Asset Cardinal has been particularly valuable in neutralizing American counterintelligence operations against PRC activities. By distracting American law enforcement and intelligence agencies with the fabricated Russia investigation, Cardinal created a window of opportunity for MSS to expand operations throughout the United States. American resources devoted to investigating non-existent Trump-Russia collusion were resources not devoted to investigating actual Chinese espionage. This operational success alone justifies the entire cost of recruiting and running Cardinal. The assessment went on to detail specific intelligence Schiff had provided. Names of CIA officers operating in China, 18 of whom were subsequently arrested, tortured, and executed. Details of NSA signals intelligence collection against Chinese military communications, allowing China to modify their systems to avoid surveillance. FBI counterintelligence investigation targets, giving Chinese intelligence advance warning to shut down or relocate their operations. Defense Department strategic planning for potential Taiwan contingencies, providing China with American military plans. The list of Schiff's betrayals went on for pages, each item representing incalculable damage to American national security. But intelligence wasn't all you provided, was it, Senator? Bongino pulled out a new set of documents. You also used your position to actively help Chinese intelligence operations against America. Exhibit A, the suppression of the COVID lab leak investigation. When evidence began emerging in early 2020 that the coronavirus might have originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, you immediately went on television to call it a conspiracy theory. He played a clip of Schiff on MSNBC. The notion that this virus escaped from a Chinese laboratory is dangerous misinformation being spread by Trump and his allies. All credible scientists agree this virus has natural origins. We cannot allow anti-Chinese racism to infect our public health response. Bongino stopped the clip. You said that on March 8, 2020. At that time, multiple intelligence agencies were actively investigating the lab leak theory. You knew it was being investigated. You knew there was substantial evidence supporting it. But you went on national television and lied because your Chinese handlers needed that investigation shut down. He pulled out translated Chinese intelligence communications. Here's an urgent message from your handler Li Zhao to MSS headquarters, dated March 6, 2020, 2 days before your TV appearance. Cardinal reports that lab origin investigation is gaining momentum in Congress and intelligence agencies. He recommends immediate action to discredit investigation as racist conspiracy theory. Cardinal will coordinate with American media allies to establish narrative that lab origin theory is scientifically baseless and politically motivated. 2 days later, you were on TV doing exactly what your Chinese handlers ordered you to do. And it worked, Bongino said, his voice heavy with disgust. Your media appearances, combined with coordinated statements from scientists who turned out to be funded by Chinese research grants, successfully killed the lab leak investigation for over a year. By the time the truth started coming out, millions of people were dead and the trail of evidence had gone cold. You helped China cover up the origins of a pandemic that killed millions of people because they paid you to. He pulled out financial records. And they paid you well. March 20th, 2020, 2 weeks after your TV appearance, your wife's consulting company received a $1.2 million payment from a shell company traced back to Chinese intelligence. Blood money, Senator. Payment for helping cover up a pandemic. Bongino moved to a new section of documents. Then there's your role in suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story in October 2020. When the New York Post broke that story, you immediately went on CNN and called it Russian disinformation. He played another clip of Schiff. This laptop is obviously Russian disinformation. We've seen this playbook before. The timing is suspicious, the source is questionable, and the content is clearly designed to interfere in our election. I call on all social media platforms to block this fake story. Within hours of your TV appearance, Bongino continued. Twitter locked the New York Post's account, Facebook suppressed the story, and Google manipulated search results to hide it. 51 former intelligence officials signed a letter calling it Russian disinformation, a letter that was later revealed to be coordinated by your staff. But here's the thing, Adam, Bongino said, leaning forward. That laptop was real. The FBI had authenticated it a year earlier. You knew it was real because you'd been briefed on the ongoing investigation. But you lied about it because guess who didn't want that story getting out before the election? He pulled out more Chinese intelligence communications. Your handlers at MSS sent explicit instructions to suppress the Hunter Biden story because it would damage Joe Biden's chances of defeating Trump. And China desperately wanted Trump out of office because he was the first president in decades to seriously challenge Chinese economic and military expansion. So you did what you were told. You went on TV. You lied to the American people. You coordinated with social media companies to censor a true story, and you helped rig an election. All on China's orders. The evidence was overwhelming, documented not just by American intelligence but by China's own records. Adam Schiff hadn't just been compromised by a foreign power. He had been an active, willing, highly productive agent of Chinese intelligence, using his position as Intelligence Committee chairman to betray his country, damage American security, and advance Chinese interests. And he had done it all while wrapping himself in the flag and claiming to be democracy's defender. Bongino reached for his fourth folder. But we're not done yet, Senator. Not even close. Because now we need to talk about the Americans who died because of the intelligence you sold. The committee room doors opened, and a procession of military personnel entered, their dress uniforms starched and pressed, their bearing rigid with military discipline and barely contained emotion. Some walked on prosthetics. Others moved with the stiffness of bodies carrying too many scars. All of them had the 1,000-yard stare of men who had seen combat and lost brothers. Ladies and gentlemen, Bongino announced with reverent solemnity, these are members of SEAL Team 6, DEVGRU, the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, America's most elite warriors, and they're here to tell you what happened when Adam Schiff sold them out to Chinese intelligence. The first SEAL, a man in his early 30s with haunted eyes, stepped to the microphone. His name tag read Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez. Sir, if I may address the committee. Bongino nodded. Please, Petty Officer. Rodriguez's voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of barely controlled rage. Operation Neptune's Thunder, May 7, 2021. Our team was tasked with intercepting a Chinese intelligence vessel in international waters of the South China Sea. The vessel was reported to be carrying captured American intelligence officers being transported to the Chinese mainland for interrogation. Our mission was to board the vessel, extract the American prisoners, and withdraw before Chinese naval forces could respond. It was supposed to be a covert operation. The Chinese weren't supposed to know we were coming. But they knew, Rodriguez continued, his voice cracking slightly. They knew our approach vector. They knew our timeline. They knew our extraction point. They knew everything because someone with access to classified mission briefings sold us out. When we fast-roped onto that deck, we didn't land on a surprised intelligence vessel. We landed in a prepared kill zone. He paused, struggling with the memory. 3 of my teammates died in the first 30 seconds. Petty Officer Second Class James Mitchell took a burst of automatic fire to the chest before his boots even hit the deck. Petty Officer Second Class David Chen was killed by a prepared explosive charge that shouldn't have been there if they hadn't known we were coming. Petty Officer Second Class Robert Williams was shot in the head by a sniper, positioned exactly where our ingress point was supposed to be. Rodriguez pulled out 3 photographs from his uniform pocket, setting them carefully on the table in front of Schiff. "These are my brothers. These are the men who died because you sold us out." He pointed to each photo. Mitchell was 24 years old. His wife was pregnant with their first child. He never got to meet his daughter. Chen was 26. He was 2 months away from finishing his enlistment and going to medical school. Williams was 28. He had survived 4 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he died on a Chinese ship because a congressman needed money. Bongino opened the folder and pulled out classified mission briefing documents. The operational plan for Neptune's Thunder was classified at the highest level. Only 16 people in the entire United States government had access to the complete mission details. He began listing them. The President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Director of National Intelligence, the CIA Director, the NSA Director, 8 military commanders directly involved in planning, and he paused for dramatic effect, the Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Bennett Schiff. Bongino pulled out translated Chinese military communications intercepted by the NSA. These are orders from Chinese naval intelligence to their forces in the South China Sea, dated May 6, 2021, 18 hours before the operation was scheduled to begin. The translation reads, "American SEAL team will attempt boarding operation on intelligence vessel Guangzhou at coordinates provided. Expect approach from northeast at 0200 hours local time. Authorization granted to use lethal force. Priority is elimination of American Special Operations personnel to send message about consequences of interfering with PRC operations. Asset Cardinal has provided complete operational details. Prepare ambush accordingly." Asset Cardinal, Bongino repeated. "Your code name, Senator." The Chinese military knew every detail of a classified American Special Operations mission because you gave it to them, and they used that information to murder 3 Navy SEALs. Rodriguez was still standing at the microphone, tears now streaming down his face. I held Mitchell in my arms as he bled out on that deck. His last words were, "How did they know, Rodriguez? How did they know we were coming?" I didn't have an answer for him then. But I do now. He looked directly at Schiff with pure hatred. "They knew because you told them, Congressman. You sold out my brothers for Chinese money. You're wearing a $3,000 suit bought with their blood." Bongino gestured to the other SEALs in the room. And Neptune's Thunder wasn't an isolated incident. He pulled out more operational documents. Operation Crimson Dawn, August 2019. CIA extraction team ambushed in Hong Kong. 3 agents killed, 2 captured. Mission details provided by Asset Cardinal 2 days before execution. Operation Pacific Shield, January 2020. Marine reconnaissance team intercepted in Philippines. 4 Marines dead, mission compromised. Intelligence sold by Asset Cardinal for $500,000. Operation Dragon's Gate, November 2022. Air Force Special Operations crew shot down over South China Sea. 8 airmen killed. Chinese forces were waiting in exact position provided by Asset Cardinal. The list continued, mission after mission, operation after operation. Each one compromised by Adam Schiff. Each one resulting in American casualties. The cumulative total was staggering. 47 American military personnel and intelligence officers killed because of information Schiff provided to Chinese intelligence. But it wasn't just tactical operations you compromised, was it, Senator? Bongino pulled out technical documents marked with the highest classification levels. You also sold them our military technology. These are blueprints for the Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine, specifically the propulsion system and sonar array. You photographed these documents during a classified briefing in April 2020 and transmitted them to your Chinese handlers through a dead drop in San Francisco. He pulled out more technical documents. Here are specifications for the F-35 fighter jet stealth coding and avionics systems. You sold these in September 2019 for $2 million. Here are details of our satellite reconnaissance capabilities, our cyber warfare tools, our signals intelligence collection methods. You sold everything you could get your hands on. Admiral James Morrison, the Navy's Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, stood from his seat in the gallery. Deputy Director Bongino, if I may address the committee. Bongino nodded respectfully. Of course, Admiral. Morrison, a distinguished officer with 40 years of service and chest full of medals, spoke with the authority of someone who had devoted his life to protecting American interests. The damage Congressman Schiff has done to American national security is almost incalculable. The submarine technology he sold to China has allowed them to build boats nearly as quiet as ours, eliminating our primary advantage in undersea warfare. The fighter jet specifications have enabled them to develop radar systems that can track our stealth aircraft. The satellite intelligence he provided has allowed them to know when we're watching them and when we're not. But the human cost, Morrison continued, his voice heavy with emotion, 3 of our submarines have gone missing in the past 2 years. USS Hartford, 134 crew members, declared lost in December 2023. USS Connecticut, 132 crew members, declared lost in April 2024. USS Virginia, 135 crew members, declared lost in September 2024. 401 American sailors, folks. 401 young men who went to sea in the most advanced submarines ever built and never came home. He pulled out intelligence assessments. Based on debris analysis and signals intelligence, we believe all 3 boats were sunk by Chinese submarines using hunting techniques and weapons technology derived from the information Congressman Schiff provided. Those sailors died because their congressman sold the technology that killed them. Women in the gallery began crying openly. One woman, identified later as the mother of a Hartford crew member, let out a wail of anguish that silenced the entire room. "My son was 22 years old," she sobbed. "He was so proud to serve on that submarine. He called me the night before they deployed and said, 'Mom, I'm protecting America.' And all that time, his own congressman was the one putting him in danger." She looked at Schiff with a mother's grief turned to fury. "You killed my boy. You killed all of them, for money. How do you sleep at night knowing what you've done?" Schiff sat frozen, his face a mask of horror as the full weight of his betrayals crashed down on him. The room was filled with families of the dead, men and women he had sent to their graves through his treachery, and there was nowhere to hide from their pain and rage. Bongino let the moment breathe, let the human cost of Schiff's crimes sink in for everyone watching. Then he reached for his 5th folder. "But selling military secrets and compromising operations wasn't enough for you, was it, Adam? You also helped China murder Americans on American soil." The folder opened to reveal crime scene photographs and FBI investigation reports. "Let's talk about Dr. Charles Lieber," Bongino began, chairman of Harvard's chemistry department, one of the world's leading nanotechnology researchers. In January 2020, he was arrested for lying about his ties to China's 1,000 Talents recruitment program. He was cooperating with federal investigators, providing names of other academics who had been recruited by Chinese intelligence. He pulled out witness statements. "Dr. Lieber was scheduled to testify before your committee in March 2020 about Chinese infiltration of American universities. But he never made it to that hearing because on March 3rd, he died in what was ruled a suicide." He pulled out the medical examiner's report. "Single gunshot wound to the head, ruled self-inflicted. No suicide note, no history of depression, but the Cambridge police quickly closed the case." Except it wasn't suicide, was it? Bongino pulled out forensic analysis documents. Independent examination of the crime scene photos shows inconsistencies with the suicide ruling. The angle of the gunshot wound is anatomically awkward for self-infliction. There's no gunshot residue on his hands. The gun found at the scene had been wiped clean of fingerprints, including his own. And most damningly, he pulled out phone records. "You called your Chinese handler Li Zhao 4 hours before Dr. Lieber's death. We have your voice on that call," Bongino said, pulling out yet another recording device. "Let me play it for you." Schiff's voice came through the speakers, tense and worried. "Lee, we have a serious problem. The Lieber situation is getting out of control. He's nomming names, including some of your key academic assets. If he testifies, your entire university recruitment network could be exposed." Li Zhao's accented response was cold and businesslike. "Cardinal, this is unfortunate but not unsolvable. The professor's testimony can be prevented. There will need to be an accident or perhaps he will become despondent about his legal troubles. Schiff's recorded voice hesitated. You're talking about killing him. Lee, that's a line I'm not sure I can cross. Lee's response was matter of fact. You have already crossed many lines, Cardinal. What is one more? The professor has chosen to betray the People's Republic. There are consequences for such betrayals. You will ensure no unusual attention is paid to his death. Tell your law enforcement contacts it was clearly suicide, case closed. Can you do this? After a long pause, Skiff's voice came back, barely a whisper. Yes, I can do it. The payment structure, Lee's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Same as the Burdain operation. 1 million upon completion. Clean, quiet, no investigation. Skiff's response was barely audible. Understood. The recording ended and the committee room erupted in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, staffers were running for exits, and even hardened politicians looked shaken by what they had just heard. Adam Schiff had just been caught on tape coordinating a murder with foreign intelligence agents. Not hinted at, not implied, explicitly coordinating a murder for money. Bongino waited for order to be restored before continuing. Since Senator Schiff mentioned the Burdain operation, let's discuss that in detail. He pulled out another set of investigation files. Anthony Burdain, celebrity chef, television host, and amateur investigative journalist. In April 2018, he began researching a documentary about Chinese influence operations in Hollywood and the media. His research led him to discover unusual financial relationships between Chinese companies and several American politicians, including you, Senator. Burdain's final text messages to his producer appeared on the screens around the room. They were haunting in their prescience. Something's not right about this Adam Schiff guy. He keeps showing up in connection with Chinese money flowing into Democratic campaigns. I think he's dirty. April 28, 2018, 3 weeks before his death. I'm being followed. Asian guys always in pairs, always a few steps behind me. They're not even trying to be subtle. It's intimidation. May 15th, 2 weeks before his death. Adam Schiff's people have been calling my producers trying to kill the documentary. They're threatening legal action, claiming defamation. But I've got the receipts, bank records, emails, meeting logs. This guy is in deep with Chinese intelligence. June 2nd, 4 days before his death. If something happens to me and I'm not being paranoid here, look into Adam Schiff and whatever he's involved with in China. These people are dangerous. I've documented everything in a safety deposit box at Chase Bank in Manhattan, box number 7483. Tell my daughter I love her. That was Burdain's last message, Bongino said quietly. 4 days later, he was found dead in his hotel room in Strasbourg, France, hanging from a bathrobe belt attached to a doorknob. French police ruled it suicide within hours. No investigation, no autopsy, case closed. He pulled out French police reports that had been carefully buried, but the initial responding officers noted several irregularities. The hotel room door had been forced open from the outside, though hotel security claimed no forced entry. Burdain had defensive wounds on his hands suggesting a struggle. His phone was wiped clean of all data, which doesn't happen automatically, and security camera footage from his hotel floor mysteriously malfunctioned for exactly 2 hours surrounding his estimated time of death. Bongino displayed security footage from other parts of the hotel, showing 2 Asian men entering and leaving the building during the camera blackout window. Facial recognition identified them as officers of China's Ministry of State Security, same agency that ran you, Senator. They flew into France 2 days before Burdain's death and left the country 6 hours after his body was discovered. They've never been questioned. And then there's this, Bongino said, pulling out bank records. 3 days after Burdain's death, your wife's consulting company received a wire transfer of $1.1 million from a Cayman Islands shell company. Blood money, Adam. Payment for coordinating the murder of an American citizen who got too close to the truth about your treason. The detective assigned to Burdain's case in France appeared on video screen, speaking through a translator. Detective Inspector Marcel Fournier, Strasbourg Police. I was removed from the Burdain case after only 6 hours and told by my superiors that American authorities had requested the case be closed immediately with a suicide ruling. I objected, citing the irregularities, and was threatened with termination if I did not comply. This was not a proper investigation. This was a cover-up, and I believe American officials at the highest levels were involved. Those American officials at the highest levels, Bongino said, looking directly at Schiff, were you and your co-conspirators. You called the State Department, the FBI, and French authorities, using your position as Intelligence Committee chairman to pressure them into closing the investigation before anyone could discover it was murder. And it worked. Anthony Bourdain was silenced. His documentary was killed and his evidence disappeared. He paused. Actually, about that evidence. Remember the safety deposit box Bourdain mentioned in his last text? We found it. Bongino held up a thick folder. Anthony Bourdain's research on Adam Schiff. 3 years of investigation. Hundreds of documents, photographs, bank records, meeting logs, everything. And it all points to exactly what we've been talking about today. You were a paid Chinese intelligence asset who murdered anyone who threatened to expose you. The room fell into shocked silence as the full scope of Adam Schiff's criminality became clear. This wasn't just corruption or abuse of power. This was a comprehensive betrayal of everything America stood for, carried out by a man who had positioned himself as the nation's conscience while secretly working for its greatest adversary. Bongino opened his final folder, the thickest one yet. Now let's talk about the big picture, Senator. Your role in China's larger strategy to subvert and ultimately destroy the United States. He pulled out classified intelligence assessments. This is a Chinese strategic planning document from 2015, before you were even on the Intelligence Committee. It's titled Long-Term Strategy for Neutralizing American Power Through Political Subversion. Let me read you some highlights. The United States cannot be defeated through conventional military confrontation. However, their democratic system creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited through careful manipulation of political processes and corruption of elected officials. The document continued. Priority targets for recruitment include members of congressional intelligence and defense committees, senior law enforcement officials, military officers with access to classified technology, and media figures capable of shaping public opinion. Initial recruitment should focus on individuals with financial vulnerabilities, personal scandals, or ideological sympathy to progressive causes that align with PRC interests. Bongino looked up from the document. You checked every box, Adam. Financial vulnerability from your wife's failing business. Progressive ideology that made you sympathetic to criticism of American power. And most importantly, massive ego and ambition that made you believe you were too smart to ever get caught. He pulled out your complete Chinese intelligence file. This is your entire recruitment and operational history, courtesy of a defector from the Ministry of State Security. Let me walk you through how they played you. First contact, March 2016, at a Silicon Valley tech conference. A Chinese businessman named Thomas Wang approached you about potential donations to your re-election campaign. You talked for 30 minutes about tech policy and Chinese-American relations. Seemed completely innocent. He pulled out surveillance photos of that initial meeting. Except Thomas Wang was actually Wang Ming, senior MSS intelligence officer. That first conversation was an assessment to determine your vulnerability to recruitment. They studied your public statements, your financial disclosures, your social media presence, everything. And they determined you were perfect, ambitious, financially stressed, and convinced of your own moral superiority. Second contact, May 2016. Wang Ming introduced you to a supposed venture capitalist named David Li who wanted to discuss Chinese investment in American infrastructure. You met for lunch at a Beverly Hills restaurant. Bongino displayed photos of that lunch. That's when they made their pitch. Not explicit recruitment, that comes later. First, they appeal to your vanity. David Li tells you how impressed Chinese leaders are with your intellect and vision. He suggests that someone like you could play a crucial role in improving U.S.-China relations, preventing conflict, maybe even winning a Nobel Peace Prize for averting war between great powers. He pulled out David Li's after-action report. Target responded positively to flattery and appeals to his self-image as historic peacemaker. He is vain, ambitious, and most importantly, convinced that rules don't apply to superior intellects like his. Recommend proceeding to financial recruitment phase. Third meeting, July 2016. Your wife's consulting business was struggling, about to declare bankruptcy. Suddenly, David Lee has a client who needs strategic communications advice, willing to pay $50,000 for a brief consultation. You didn't question where the money came from or whether the consultation was legitimate. You just took it. That's how it started, Bongino explained. 50,000 here, 75,000 there. Always with a plausible cover story. Always just enough to keep you financially stable but hungry for more. And with each payment you became more compromised, more obligated, more dependent on Chinese money. By the time you were elected Intelligence Committee Chairman in January 2017, you were already in their pocket. You just didn't know how deep yet. Bongino pulled out the operational timeline. January 2017, you receive your first official tasking from MSS. They want information about CIA operations in China. You provide names of CIA officers, locations of safe houses, details of ongoing operations. Payment, $200,000. March 2017, you provide NSA signals intelligence collection methods and frequencies. Payment, $350,000. July 2017, you photograph classified Defense Department strategic plans. Payment, $500,000. The payments escalated as your treachery deepened. By 2019, you were earning over $1 million per quarter, plus bonuses for particularly valuable intelligence. You became one of China's most productive intelligence assets in history, more valuable than Robert Hanssen, more damaging than Aldrich Ames, more treacherous than Julius Rosenberg. And the beautiful part, from China's perspective, Bongino continued, was that your public persona as Trump's chief critic provided perfect cover. Americans watching CNN saw a concerned congressman protecting democracy from a dangerous president. They had no idea they were watching a traitor working for America's greatest adversary. Your anti-Trump crusade was actually a Chinese intelligence operation designed to distract American law enforcement and intelligence agencies, while MSS expanded operations throughout the United States. Every hour the FBI spent investigating fabricated Trump-Russia collusion was an hour they weren't investigating actual Chinese espionage. It was brilliant, really. Use an American congressman's political ambitions and hatred of Trump to cripple American counterintelligence. Bongino pulled out damage assessments from multiple intelligence agencies. The CIA estimates that your betrayal compromised at least 40 operations and resulted in the deaths of 18 intelligence officers. The NSA believes Chinese modifications to their systems based on your intelligence have set back American signals collection capabilities by a decade. The FBI calculates that Chinese espionage in America increased 300% during your time as Intelligence Committee Chairman because you warned them whenever investigations got close. The Defense Department believes the technology you sold has advanced Chinese military capabilities by 15 to 20 years, eliminating American advantages that took decades and trillions of dollars to develop. Ladies and gentlemen, Bongino addressed the cameras and the packed gallery. What we're looking at is the most comprehensive betrayal in American history. Schiff didn't just sell secrets. He didn't just compromise operations. He systematically dismantled American intelligence and counterintelligence capabilities while simultaneously advancing Chinese strategic interests. He used his position as Intelligence Committee Chairman to protect his Chinese handlers, attack anyone who threatened to expose him, and murder American citizens who got too close to the truth. He did all of this while wrapping himself in the Constitution and claiming to be democracy's defender. The hypocrisy is so massive, so complete, that it's almost difficult to comprehend. Bongino stood up, his voice rising with righteous anger. This man, he pointed at Schiff, who now sat slumped in his wheelchair looking like he might vomit. This man impeached a president for a phone call while he was taking millions from Chinese intelligence. He accused others of betraying America while he was actually doing it. He claimed to protect our democracy while actively working to undermine it for a foreign power. There has never been a more dangerous, more destructive, more treasonous figure in the history of American politics. Federal marshals moved forward with official arrest warrants. Adam Bennett Schiff, The lead marshal announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the room and to millions watching on television. You are under arrest for treason, espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, lying to Congress, lying to federal investigators, abuse of power, violation of the Espionage Act, and receiving illegal payments from a foreign power. The charges include 63 separate felony counts, each carrying sentences ranging from 20 years to life in prison, with several counts carrying potential death penalty provisions. Schiff's collapse was complete. His hyperventilating became so severe that paramedics had to administer oxygen through a mask. His hands shook uncontrollably as handcuffs were applied to his wrists. The man who had spent 8 years projecting power and authority was reduced to a trembling, gasping wreck being lifted onto a stretcher for transport to federal custody. But before they wheeled him out, Bongino had one final thing to say. Adam, I want you to remember something. You spent 8 years thinking you were untouchable because of your position, your connections, your media protection. You thought the rules didn't apply to you because you were smart enough, connected enough, protected enough to never face consequences. Bongino walked over to stand directly over the stretcher, looking down at Schiff with cold contempt. You were wrong. The rule of law still matters in America. Justice may be slow, but it's not blind and it's definitely not stupid. We've been watching you for years, building this case piece by piece, document by document, recording by recording. And today, finally, you've been held accountable for your crimes. He gestured to the families of fallen service members, murdered civilians, and compromised intelligence officers filling the gallery. These people, the ones you betrayed and destroyed in your pursuit of money and power, they finally got justice. And you're going to spend the rest of your life in a federal supermax prison, probably in solitary confinement because we can't risk you selling out fellow prisoners to Chinese intelligence. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that the microphones barely picked up. I hope it was worth it, Adam. I hope those millions of dollars were worth destroying your name, your legacy, your freedom, and your soul, because you're done. You're finished. And history is going to remember you as exactly what you are, the worst traitor America has ever produced. As Schiff was wheeled toward the exit, Bongino returned to the microphone to address the nation. Folks, what you witnessed today is proof that in America, nobody is above the law. Not a Harvard lawyer, not a congressman, not a senator, nobody. It doesn't matter how powerful you think you are, how protected, how connected. If you betray this country, if you sell out your fellow Americans, if you commit treason, you will be caught and you will be held accountable. His voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. To every corrupt politician watching, to every bureaucrat who thinks they're untouchable, to every person in power who believes they can abuse that power without consequences, we're coming for you. We have the evidence, we have the will, and we have the American people behind us. This is just the beginning. The swamp is being drained, one traitor at a time, and we're not going to stop until every corrupt official who has betrayed public trust is behind bars where they belong. Bongino's final words echoed through the chamber with the force of a pronouncement from history itself. America is being restored. The Constitution is being defended. Justice is being served. And to the families who lost loved ones because of Adam Schiff's treason, today is for you. It doesn't bring them back, but it ensures that the man responsible will face the harshest penalty the law allows. Your sons, your daughters, your husbands, your wives, they died serving their country. And today, their country finally honored their sacrifice by delivering justice. As Schiff disappeared through the committee room doors in handcuffs, as his political career ended in complete disgrace, as his freedom was stripped away, and his legacy was reduced to that of history's greatest traitor, one truth resonated through the chamber and across the nation. The long arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, and today, finally, it had bent all the way. Within hours of Schiff's arrest, the political world exploded in chaos. Video of his breakdown, his arrest, and the evidence presented against him became the most-watched political content in internet history, with over 2 billion views in the first 24 hours. Social media platforms that had spent years protecting Schiff and promoting his accusations against Trump were suddenly scrambling to delete their own complicit coverage. Twitter trended with hashtags like Schiff Traitor, China's Puppet, and Bongino was right. each with hundreds of millions of mentions. Democratic Party leadership went into absolute meltdown. Nancy Pelosi, who had championed Schiff and given him unprecedented power as Intelligence Committee chairman, announced her immediate resignation from Congress in a tearful press conference. "I failed America," she said, her voice breaking. "I failed to see what was happening right under my nose. I protected and promoted a man who was betraying everything we claim to stand for. I can no longer serve in Congress knowing I enabled the worst traitor in American history." Chuck Schumer called an emergency session to announce that the Senate would cooperate fully with all criminal investigations. "The Democratic Party demands complete accountability," he said, looking visibly shaken. "We will not protect anyone, regardless of position or past service, who has betrayed American national security." Within 48 hours, 17 Democratic congressmen and senators announced their retirement rather than face questions about what they knew regarding Schiff's activities. The party that had spent years claiming Trump was compromised by Russia now had to reckon with the fact that they had harbored an actual Chinese spy in their leadership for nearly a decade. CNN, MSNBC, and the other mainstream media outlets that had given Schiff thousands of hours of airtime to make his accusations face their own reckoning. Viewers were furious, trust in media collapsed to all-time lows, and several high-profile anchors resigned in disgrace. Anderson Cooper gave an emotional on-air apology. "I believed Adam Schiff," he said, his voice cracking. "I gave him my platform to make accusations against President Trump while he was actually committing the crimes he accused others of. I failed as a journalist. I failed my viewers. I failed America." Rachel Maddow's breakdown was even more dramatic. She had built her entire show around Schiff's Russia collusion narrative, and now that narrative was revealed to have been Chinese propaganda designed to distract from actual espionage. "I got played," she admitted in a rambling 2-hour special. "Everything I told you, everything I believed, it was all a lie created by a Chinese intelligence operation, and I was too caught up in my own biases to see it." Joe Scarborough announced he was leaving Morning Joe. "I can't look at myself in the mirror," he said. "I had Adam Schiff on my show over 200 times. 200 times I gave him a platform to lie to America. How do I come back from that?" The FBI's investigation expanded rapidly as more evidence of Schiff's espionage network emerged. His wife Eve was arrested for money laundering and conspiracy. His chief of staff was charged with being an accessory to espionage. 3 other congressional staffers were indicted for their roles in the operation, and dozens of Chinese intelligence officers were expelled from the United States as their networks were systematically dismantled. Dan Bongino became an overnight American hero. Within a week, he had 50 million new social media followers. Publishers were offering him $20 million advances for his book about the investigation. Hollywood studios were bidding for movie rights, with the winning offer exceeding $100 million. And grassroots movements in all 50 states were organizing Bongino for president campaigns, despite his repeated insistence that he had no interest in running for office. "Folks," he said during a press conference outside FBI headquarters, "I'm not a politician. I'm a cop who happens to be good at catching bad guys. Let the politicians do politics. I'm going to keep doing what I do best, which is draining this swamp one corrupt official at a time." His approval ratings reached 97%, the highest ever recorded for any public figure in American history. Adam Schiff's military tribunal convened with unprecedented speed. The evidence was so overwhelming, and his guilt so obvious that even his team of high-priced defense lawyers advised him to plead guilty in exchange for life in prison, rather than risk the death penalty at trial. The sentencing hearing was broadcast live to record global audiences. Federal Judge Sarah Martinez, a no-nonsense jurist known for harsh sentences in espionage cases, read the verdict with cold precision. "Adam Bennett Schiff, you have pled guilty to 47 counts of espionage, treason, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to murder, and related charges. The damage you have done to American national security is almost beyond calculation. American military personnel died because of intelligence you sold. American intelligence officers were captured, tortured, and executed because you betrayed them. American technological advantages were eliminated because you sold our secrets. And American citizens were murdered because they threatened to expose your treachery. She looked at Schiff with undisguised contempt. You violated your oath of office, betrayed your constituents, and sold out your country for money. You are, without question, the most damaging traitor in American history. The court sentences you to life in federal prison without possibility of parole on each count, to be served consecutively. You will spend the remainder of your days in solitary confinement at ADX Florence Supermax facility. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court certainly will not. Schiff's Chinese-funded mansion in Beverly Hills was seized and auctioned, with all proceeds going to families of service members killed by his betrayal. His wife's art gallery was shut down and investigated for its role in money laundering. His children, whose expensive educations had been funded by Chinese blood money, were left to deal with the shame of bearing the name of America's greatest traitor. Swiss and Cayman Islands authorities froze and seized all Schiff family accounts, ultimately recovering over $60 million in Chinese payments. International arrest warrants were issued for MSS officers Chen Wei, Li Zhao, Wang Ming, and dozens of others involved in the Schiff operation. China's intelligence network in America, carefully built over decades, was rolled up within months as Schiff's cooperation with investigators led to the identification of hundreds of other assets and sympathizers. Beijing's leadership faced international condemnation and economic consequences for their espionage operation. The Chinese Communist Party was forced to publicly disavow the Schiff operation and sacrifice several senior MSS officials to save face, though nobody believed their claims of limited knowledge. Dan Bongino's first year as FBI director was spent rebuilding American counterintelligence capabilities and restoring public trust in law enforcement. His reforms were comprehensive and ruthless. On day one, he fired 47 agents and administrators who had been complicit in protecting Schiff or covering up Chinese espionage. Day two saw the implementation of new protocols for monitoring congressional access to classified information. Day 3 began the process of reviewing every intelligence operation Schiff had access to determine what had been compromised. The FBI serves the American people, not political parties, Bongino announced during his first press conference as director. We follow evidence wherever it leads, we protect the Constitution above all else, and we hold everyone accountable regardless of position or politics. Under his leadership, FBI approval ratings jumped from 30% to 85% within 6 months. Federal prisoner number 89,472, formerly known as Senator Adam Schiff, spent his days in a 7-by-12-foot concrete cell at ADX Florence, the Supermax prison reserved for the most dangerous criminals and traitors. 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, 1 hour of exercise in a concrete yard, no human contact except handcuffed meetings with lawyers through reinforced glass. The man who had once commanded television cameras and committee gavels now had less freedom than the Americans he had sent to their deaths. His appeals were rejected by every court, including the Supreme Court, which declined to even hear his case. His requests for interview opportunities were denied by every media outlet. The same outlets that had once given him unlimited airtime now wanted nothing to do with him. His memoir proposals were rejected by every publisher. Even his own family stopped visiting after the first year, unable to bear the shame of being associated with America's most notorious traitor. 6 months after the hearing that destroyed Adam Schiff and exposed the depth of Chinese infiltration in American government, Dan Bongino stood before a joint session of Congress to deliver what would be remembered as one of the most important speeches in American history. "My fellow Americans," he began, his New York accent carrying to every corner of the chamber and to millions watching around the world, "what we learned from the Schiff investigation is a lesson every generation must relearn. Evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious malice. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the flag, speaking the language of patriotism while betraying everything that flag represents. Adam Schiff fooled a lot of people for a long time because he understood how to manipulate our better instincts, our desire to believe in leaders, our hope that people in power will do the right thing. But the truth is simple. Power corrupts, and unchecked power corrupts absolutely. That's why we have oversight, accountability, and the rule of law. That's why no one, absolutely no one, can be above the law in America. His voice rose with passion. To every young person watching who might be tempted by the kind of corruption Schiff embraced, let me be crystal clear. It's not worth it. The money, the power, the sense of being above the rules, it all ends the same way. In handcuffs in prison, with your name turned into a curse word that parents used to teach their children about betrayal. Adam Schiff threw away everything. His career, his freedom, his family, his legacy, for Chinese money. And now he'll spend the rest of his life in a concrete box, remembered by history as a traitor. Is that really worth a few $1,000,000? To the families who lost loved ones because of Schiff's treason, Bongino's voice softened with genuine emotion. I know nothing can bring them back. No amount of justice can fill the hole left by a murdered son or daughter, husband or wife, father or mother. But I hope you can take some small comfort in knowing that the man responsible faced the harshest penalty the law allows. Your loved ones died serving their country, and their country finally honored their sacrifice by delivering justice. They will never be forgotten. Their names will be remembered, and their sacrifice helped expose a threat to our republic that might otherwise have continued for years. His final promise resonated across the nation. And to every corrupt politician, every dirty bureaucrat, every person in power who thinks they can betray public trust without consequences, hear me clearly. We're coming. We have the evidence, we have the resources, we have the will, and we have the American people behind us. The Schiff investigation was just the beginning. We're not stopping until every traitor, every corrupt official, every person who has sold out their country is held accountable. The swamp is being drained, one criminal at a time, and we will not rest until American government once again serves the people instead of serving itself. The speech received a 15-minute standing ovation from both parties, a rare moment of unity in a divided capital. But more importantly, it resonated with ordinary Americans who had felt for too long that their government was corrupt and their voices didn't matter. Bongino had shown them that justice was still possible, that accountability still existed, that the system could still work if good people were willing to fight for it. In the years that followed, the Schiff case became a watershed moment in American history, taught in law schools as an example of how comprehensive counterintelligence investigations should be conducted, studied in military academies as a cautionary tale about the damage insider threats can cause, and referenced in political science courses as proof that democratic systems can still hold their own leaders accountable. The evidence Bongino had compiled became the gold standard for espionage prosecutions, and his methodical approach to building an airtight case inspired a new generation of FBI agents and prosecutors. The Chinese intelligence network that Schiff had been part of continued to unravel for years after his arrest. His cooperation with investigators, motivated by a desperate hope of reducing his sentence that never materialized, led to the identification of over 200 other Chinese assets and sympathizers in American government, academia, media, and business. Some were prosecuted, others were quietly removed from positions of influence, and a few fled to China before they could be arrested. The scope of Chinese infiltration shocked even seasoned intelligence professionals who thought they understood the threat. Beijing had spent decades and billions of dollars building networks designed to influence American policy, steal American technology, and ultimately weaken American power. Adam Schiff had been their crown jewel, but he was far from their only asset. The cleanup operation took years and fundamentally changed how America approached counterintelligence and foreign influence operations. Dan Bongino served as FBI director for 6 years, transforming the Bureau from an organization that had lost public trust into one of the most respected institutions in American government. His no-nonsense approach, street cop mentality, and absolute refusal to play political games resonated with Americans exhausted by corruption and double standards. He retired in 2030 to spend more time with his family and write about his experiences, though he remained a powerful voice in American politics through his podcasts, books, and speaking engagements. His memoir, Justice Delayed: How We Caught America's Biggest Traitor, became the best-selling nonfiction book in American history, with over 50 million copies sold worldwide. The movie adaptation, starring a major Hollywood actor as Bongino and another as Schiff, won multiple Academy Awards and became one of the highest-grossing films ever made. But Bongino always insisted that the real heroes were the intelligence officers who had died because of Schiff's betrayal, the family members who had to live with that loss, and the American people who had demanded accountability. Adam Schiff's name became synonymous with treachery and betrayal. "Don't be a Schiff" entered common usage as a warning against corruption and self-dealing. Political opponents accused each other of pulling a Schiff when caught in lies or ethical violations. Parents used his story to teach their children about the consequences of dishonesty and greed. His former colleagues in Congress went out of their way to distance themselves from him, with some literally removing his name from legislation they had co-sponsored. Harvard Law School revoked his degree, an almost unprecedented action that sent shockwaves through the legal community. His hometown of Framingham, Massachusetts, removed his name from a park that had been dedicated to him early in his career, replacing it with a memorial to the service members killed because of his betrayal. In his cell at ADX Florence, Schiff aged rapidly under the weight of isolation and regret. His hair turned completely white within 2 years. His health deteriorated despite adequate medical care. Inmates reported hearing him talking to himself, sometimes arguing with imaginary accusers, sometimes breaking down in tears. Prison psychologists noted signs of severe depression and anxiety, though they found him competent to continue serving his sentence. He was denied access to television, newspapers, and internet, kept completely isolated from the outside world he had betrayed. The only communications he received were legal documents related to his various failed appeals and occasional letters from victims' families expressing their hatred and their satisfaction that he would die in prison. He was allowed no visitors after his family stopped coming. No friends remained to make the trip. No former colleagues wanted to be associated with him. He was utterly alone with his guilt and his memories of the power he had once wielded. The congressional reforms that followed the Schiff scandal were comprehensive and far-reaching. New protocols required multiple levels of oversight for congressional access to classified information. Financial disclosure requirements were strengthened and actually enforced. Foreign contacts had to be reported within 24 hours. Family members' business dealings received much closer scrutiny. And perhaps most importantly, congressional immunity was clarified to explicitly exclude criminal activity, making it clear that no member of Congress could hide behind their position to avoid prosecution for actual crimes. The intelligence committees underwent complete restructuring, with term limits imposed to prevent any single member from accumulating too much power and knowledge. Background checks for committee members became more rigorous, including lifestyle polygraphs and continuous monitoring for signs of foreign influence. And a new independent inspector general position was created specifically to monitor congressional handling of classified information. The relationship between America and China fundamentally changed in the wake of the Schiff revelations. The evidence of systematic espionage, political influence operations, and willingness to murder American citizens on American soil convinced even China's most optimistic advocates that Beijing could not be trusted as a responsible international actor. Economic sanctions targeting Chinese companies and officials involved in espionage became law with overwhelming bipartisan support. Technology transfer restrictions were tightened to prevent future theft of American innovations. Military cooperation that had been growing was completely suspended, and diplomatic relations cooled to their lowest point since the normalization of relations in the 1970s. China's international reputation suffered tremendously as details of their espionage operations became public. European allies who had been reluctant to confront Chinese influence were forced to acknowledge the threat and take action. Japan, South Korea, and other Asian democracies strengthened their own counterintelligence capabilities and reduced their economic dependence on China. Australia, which had been heavily infiltrated by Chinese intelligence, conducted its own sweeping investigation that resulted in dozens of arrests and expulsions. The evidence from the Schiff case became a template for how democracies worldwide could identify and prosecute Chinese influence operations. 10 years after that famous hearing, on the anniversary of Schiff's arrest, Bongino returned to the same committee room where he had exposed America's greatest traitor. The room was packed with many of the same people who had witnessed that historic day, veterans who had survived operations Schiff compromised, family members of those who hadn't, intelligence officers who had worked on the investigation, and journalists who had covered the story. Bongino, now in his late 50s with more gray in his hair but the same intensity in his eyes, stood at the same witness table where he had presented his devastating evidence a decade earlier. "Folks," he began, and the room fell silent at that familiar opening. 10 years ago in this room, we proved that justice still matters in America. We showed that no one, regardless of position or power, is above the law. We demonstrated that patient, methodical investigation can bring down even the most protected and dangerous criminals. And we sent a message to corrupt officials everywhere that their time would come, that accountability would find them, that betrayal would not be tolerated. He paused, looking around the room at faces marked by grief and by satisfaction at justice served. But I want to talk today about what we've learned in the decades since Adam Schiff's arrest, because the lessons go far beyond one man's treachery. We learned that our systems, while not perfect, can still work when good people are willing to do hard things. We learned that the American people, when given the truth, will demand accountability. We learned that our enemies are patient, sophisticated, and willing to play long games that span decades. And most importantly, we learned that eternal vigilance really is the price of liberty. Bongino's voice took on a more somber tone. The Schiff case wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger problem: systematic foreign influence in American institutions, corruption enabled by a culture that protected powerful people from consequences, and a loss of faith in basic principles like honesty, integrity, and service over self-interest. We fixed some of those problems. The reforms we implemented have made it harder for foreign powers to recruit American officials. The accountability we demonstrated has deterred some potential traitors. But the work isn't done, and it never will be done. Every generation has to defend democracy against those who would corrupt it. Every generation has to prove that principles matter more than power. He looked directly at the cameras broadcasting his speech. To young people watching who are thinking about careers in public service, let me tell you what the Schiff case taught me about what America needs. We need people who see public service as exactly that, service, not an opportunity for personal enrichment or power. We need people who understand that holding classified information is a sacred trust, not a commodity to be sold. We need people who love America more than they love money, fame, or ideology. And we need people who are willing to stand up to corruption, even when it's politically inconvenient, even when it costs them personally, even when powerful people tell them to look the other way. If you want to know whether you're cut out for public service, ask yourself one question: what would you do if you discovered that a powerful colleague was betraying their country? Would you report it, knowing it might destroy your career? Would you investigate it, knowing powerful forces would try to stop you? Would you expose it, knowing you might be attacked and smeared? If your answer is yes, if you're willing to do the right thing regardless of cost, then America needs you. But if you're thinking about public service as a path to wealth or influence, if you see government position as something to be exploited, if you believe rules are for other people but not for you, then please, do us all a favor and stay in the private sector where your corruption will do less damage. Bongino's voice rose with passion. Adam Schiff thought he was too smart to get caught. He thought his position protected him. He thought his media allies would cover for him. He thought the system was too broken to hold him accountable. He was wrong about all of it. And every corrupt official since then who has been caught and prosecuted learned the same lesson. Justice may be slow, it may be difficult, it may require years of patient work, but it comes. It always comes. And when it does, no amount of money, power, or connections can save you. He gestured to the families of fallen service members in the audience. These families lost loved ones because one man put money before country. They've lived with that loss for over a decade. But they've also seen justice served. They've seen reforms implemented to prevent future skiffs. They've seen their loved ones honored and remembered. It doesn't bring them back, nothing can, but it matters. Justice matters. Accountability matters. Truth matters. And as long as there are people willing to fight for those things, America will endure. Bongino's final words echoed with the weight of a decade's reflection and the hope for future generations. 10 years ago, we exposed a traitor and dismantled a spy network. But more importantly, we reminded America that our system, for all its flaws, can still work. That justice, while sometimes delayed, is not denied. That accountability, while sometimes difficult, is possible. And that the rule of law, while sometimes tested, ultimately prevails. That's the real legacy of the Schiff case, not just that we caught one traitor, but that we proved the system can catch traitors. And that proof, that demonstration that justice still works, is what keeps democracy alive. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 20 minutes, tears streaming down many faces as they remembered loved ones lost, and justice finally served. News coverage of Bongino's anniversary speech reached over 3 billion people worldwide, making it one of the most-watched political addresses in history. And in a small concrete cell in Colorado, federal prisoner 89,472 listened to a guard's description of the speech and understood that even a decade later, even buried alive in a supermax prison, his betrayal would never be forgotten and never be forgiven. Adam Bennett's Schiff would be remembered by history, but only as a cautionary tale, a warning about the consequences of betrayal, and proof that in America, eventually justice prevails. And so, folks, if you've made it this far through this incredible story of corruption exposed and justice served, I need you to do something for me right now. Smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone you know who needs to understand that accountability still exists in America. The mainstream media won't tell you these stories. The corrupt politicians don't want you to know that they can be held accountable. But we're exposing the truth, and we're not going to stop until every American knows that justice still matters. Drop a comment below telling me what you think about the Schiff case and what other corrupt politicians you want us to investigate next. Because, folks, this is just the beginning. There are more traitors, more corruption, more stories that need to be told. And with your support, we're going to tell every single one of them. Subscribe now, share this video, and let's drain this swamp together. Because in America, no one is above the law, and that's a promise we're going to keep fighting to fulfill. God bless you all, and God bless America.